Welcome. I'm Spencer Shunk. This is Old Movies for Young People, and this is
Brad Fraser. And today we're talking about The General from 1926 by Buster Keaton, featuring Buster Keaton and Marion Mack and a cast of thousands in what is, in my estimation, one of the best silent films ever made and one of the greatest comedies ever made. Now, that's kind of hard to believe because the movie was actually a huge flop when it was first released. However, that has changed. And since its release, and since, we've started to study film, it actually has become one of the best loved comedies in film history and usually makes it into a lot of people's top 10 list of best movies ever made.
Buster Keaton is a train conductor. He's living in the South during the U.S. Civil War. He goes to sign up. He gets rejected from the Confederate Army.
Because he's too important as an engineer. They don't want him in the Army, but his girlfriend doesn't know that.
Yes. He finds a Union spy, this is quite a bit later, I think it's about a year later or something, who they've infiltrated behind Confederate lines and they're going to steal a train.
So the movie is basically divided into two parts. The first is him taking the train and going to the north, where he discovers Marion Mack has been kidnapped and he has to free her. In the middle of the movie, he ends up hiding in the barracks or the clubhouse of the invading army.
Under the table.
And under the table.
The generals are meeting. Yeah.
Behind the tablecloth while the generals are meeting, which is a lot of comedy, which we've seen in movies before. But you have to remember, we probably hadn't seen it in a movie before this. And then when he finds his girlfriend and he rescues her and they're in a rainstorm and suddenly they're attacked by a bear that comes out of nowhere and you're like, what? Yeah. There's a fucking bear. There's a bear in this movie. And it just adds to the delight of the entire experience. And the second half is them trying to take the train back to the south to warn people that the north is on their way. And what happens is really just an extrapolation of comic situations that could happen on a train. I think the most amazing thing about the movie is what they do physically. What they do physically with the trains and what Keaton does physically with his body.
Yeah, the stunts are absolutely incredible. He does them all himself, and many of them are he's risking his life.
Yeah, hugely dangerous. There's one sequence where the train of his enemy is ahead of him and they're throwing railroad ties onto the track to try to stop his train. They destroyed 3 antique trains in making this movie. This was the most expensive movie made at the time.
And because you know it's all real, visually to me it's more impressive than almost any CGI-infused film.
Because it's not, the action isn't being created through quick cuts.
No.
The action is actually happening, and we're seeing it in long shots or in medium shots, so there's no cheating at all.
I think this movie in particular is very accessible for a silent movie, to someone of my age. We have this sort of stereotypical association with silent movies that they're slow, boring, and unfunny, and this movie is none of that.
Buster Keaton, while he was one of the hugest silent film stars of his period, it was after this film that his career started to slow down and go on the rocks, and unlike, very few silent film stars made the transition to sound films very successfully.
Just from this movie alone, I'm pretty much convinced that Buster Keaton is one of the greatest actors of all time. I mean, just what he can do physically, not just with his face, but his strength, his agility, his athleticism. Should we talk about how this movie is problematic in terms of its depiction of the South?
Well, it doesn't really depict. I mean, what's weird about it it's based on a novel, and the hero of the novel was actually from the North.
Right.
And when Keaton bought the novel and adapted it, he felt that audiences wouldn't relate to a hero from the North, so he had the hero move to the South, fighting with the North. When you look at the antebellum obsession, Hollywood has, particularly in the 20th century, with the South and with the Civil War, and movies like Gone with the Wind and Jezebel and stuff, they're almost all told from the point of view of the South, who actually lost the war.
Yeah.
So why are we mourning this period so much?
A slave society.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are we mourning that?
They're mourning not being able to own people. There is not a single black person in this movie.
So obviously Buster and whoever else made the movie with him is trying to stay away from the race relations question, but how can you?
I don't think there's any point in judging historical periods with our ethics, but it is worth discussing the fact that this racism still is endemic in the art form now.
I love everything about the conception and execution of this movie physically. Like every frame, everything we're seeing visually happen. I think it's a beautiful example of a silent film. Like if you've never seen a silent film before, this is a great one to start with because it's almost all told pictorially.
This is Brad Fraser.
This is Spencer Sean.
And we're saying goodbye. We'll see you next time on Old Movies for Young People. You're supposed to say that with me.
Oh, we're supposed to say that together? Yeah.